Good evening and welcome to Hardfire. I'm your host, Mark Axinn of the New York State Libertarian Party, and it's my pleasure to be with you once again for a half-hour discussion of politics and current events from a libertarian perspective. Tonight, joining us remotely from the town of Guilderland, New York, just outside of Albany, is Warren Redlich, the Libertarian Party candidate for governor. Warren, welcome to Hardfire.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Warren, and let's get right into it. Why are you running for governor, and what message do you bring to the voters?
I'm running for governor for one very simple reason. We need to stop wasting money. I've been campaigned for other offices before. It's been a central focus of my campaigns. It's a central focus of, I have a blog called Stop Wasting Money. If you Google Stop Wasting Money, you'll find me. And my message in my campaign is that, when you look at New York State's current budget problems, it's unbelievable how deep in trouble we are. And yet when you look at the budget, it's unbelievable how easy it is to fix these problems.
Well, how would you fix some of the problems?
Well, number one, we spend money on things we shouldn't spend money on. Principal one that I think almost everyone agrees with is corporate welfare. We spend approximately $3 billion a year in the state budget, $3 billion a year on what they call economic development. Economic development is just another nice word for corporate welfare, crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it. So I think we need to stop wasting money on economic development because it's obviously not working. So that's
who's getting that money?
Empire State Development Corporation then parcels it out to this corporation, that corporation. I haven't gotten into all the details of all of it. There's a big hubbub right now in my area with a place called Global Foundries in Malta, where they funneled all this money into this AMD chip plant, and now they're trying to get their tax assessment reduced.
Well, is that creating jobs and helping the local economy?
In theory it is, but strangely our local economy is still in trouble.
Isn't that
so
a surprise?
It's nice to say it,
the
but
government
that's an example,
program is
then,
not doing what it's supposed to do?
It's not open yet. There's always the question whether it's really going to open, but I don't know. I haven't gone through the economic development budget and seen exactly what's spent where. I just know when you look at the budget, they spend $3 billion on it. As a libertarian, I'm opposed to the government doing that.
What other areas are there for the government to stop wasting money?
Well, there's some great examples like the Commission of Corrections. When you read their website for the Commission of Corrections, it's a 3-member deliberative body that meets monthly to discuss corrections issues. Think about that for a minute. Now, guess how much that would cost? Because if you take you, me, and Gary, the 3 of us could probably do that with a pizza and a six-pack for $300 a year.
But the government spends more, I bet.
What's that?
I bet you the government spends more than that.
No, it's $3 million a year for 3 people to talk once a month. It's unbelievable that they do this. Then you have the Crime Victims Board. That sounds really good, doesn't it? The Crime Victims Board costs $77 million a year. It distributes $27 million to crime victims. So it's $50 million in overhead to distribute $27 million to victims. I know it's not nice to say, geez, maybe the crime victims have to find another way to deal with their problems. But if we're spending $77 million to distribute $27 million, I think it's time we stopped. And another great example, the Commission on Public Integrity. It's pretty clear that's not working.
No, I would guess so.
And then another great example is the State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. Again, it sounds so nice. We've got to prevent domestic violence. One of the principal missions of the Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence is to advise the governor on domestic violence issues, which leads to a question with Governor Patterson. What did they advise him when it came to tampering with witnesses in a domestic violence case?
Well, also I think prostitution is illegal in the state, and Governor Spitzer ran into some trouble on that one as well.
Well, that wouldn't go to the Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, but it would go to the Commission on Public Integrity, and that would apply to a long list of New York State public officials who've had problems, from Hevesy to Bruno, Republican, Democrat. You got a long list.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're different from these fellows.
There's a lot of reasons. Number one, I'm not a professional politician. It's actually a big handicap. But I actually have a real job, and I work for a living, and it's a handicap because as a candidate, I get requests from people all the time, come to our event here, come to our event there. Well, there's 62 counties in New York State. And if you go to each county 10 times, that's 620 visits, and you do that over 150 days, that's 4 visits a day. It's kind of hard to have a job if you're doing that, unless you're a professional politician. And yet people will say, well, geez, if you're not going to come to our event, then we just don't think you're a serious candidate. Okay. And then we want you to have family values, but we want you to leave your family. for
Yeah,
6 months.
that's,
while you're
they're
campaigning.
very, very hypocritical on all of that. So let's go
So,
back a bit.
but no,
You're an
let me
attorney,
get
are
to your
you
question
not?
though. Your question was, how am I different? And I think the biggest difference between myself and all the other major candidates who've announced, really any other candidate, even minor candidates who announced, is I have an actual specific plan. Here's where I will cut. There's a number of candidates who say I have a plan here, I have a plan there. They have vague promises to cap spending or cut spending with no answers. I tell you whose job gets cut. I tell you who gets fired. Because that's ultimately, if you're going to cut spending, people are going to get fired. People are going to have their pay cut. People are going to have their benefits cut. People are going to get fired. And I actually tell the voters who I'm firing.
But don't we need all
who I'm
those
laying off to make
services
it
in New
nice.
York?
What's that?
Don't we need all those services in New York?
No.
That's a good answer. Okay, what would you do? Who would you cut?
Well, that's what I was saying. There's those agencies that I would eliminate. Anybody who works in corporate welfare for the state government is gone. Anybody who works for the Commission on Public Integrity is gone. Anybody who works for the Commission of Corrections is gone. Anybody who works, and there's another agency that's a fairly big expenditure, is the Office for Technology, which is supposed to standardize technology across the different state agencies, but the agencies don't listen. So it's just a huge waste of money, and they provide secure servers. Like, you can't get secure servers in the private sector. So it's a huge waste of money, and we can save a huge amount of money. There's 700 employees, 70 of them make more than $100,000 a year. A tremendous way to save money is to eliminate a whole bunch of these agencies that are a waste of time. And there's more on my website. My website, wredlich.com/NY. And there's one other thing that's different, and I wanted to stress, and this is like one of the biggest issues in the campaign. I'll go into it this way. When I've been campaigning, I ask people what they think the head of the New York Public Library makes. And people will guess 100,000, 150,000. Some people will figure out I'm onto something. They'll say $250,000. The head of the New York Public Library makes $689,000 a year. $689,000 a year. $500,000 a year more than the governor.
That's a lot of money.
And there are 90,000 bureaucrats in New York State who make over $100,000 a year. This creates problems with our budget with pay. It also creates problems with our budget with pensions. We have people who are getting pensions of over $200,000 a year. And that doesn't make sense. It's not good for our state finances, and it's not good for people. And it's not a libertarian issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. Socialists think the head of a library shouldn't make that much money. Communists think the head of a library shouldn't make that much money. So I have a proposal that's pretty controversial, but most people like it, which is to cap bureaucrat pay, public sector pay, at $100,000 a year. That would save $2 billion the first year just on pay, and it'll save a lot more on pensions.
Okay, let's talk about some other issues. You're an attorney. I believe you do criminal defense work predominantly. I imagine you run into some issues with either drug or alcohol problems up in your neck of the woods.
I handle a lot of DWI cases. I handle a lot of marijuana cases. I handle some other drug cases. And I'm a longtime critic of the drug war. More than probably 10 years ago, I created a website called repeal.net, which advocates the repeal of prohibition because prohibitions don't work.
How has drug prohibition hurt New York over the last decade?
Oh, I would say it's a lot longer than a decade. We're spending a huge amount of money. We're ruining people's lives. We're taking parents away from their children. They may not be the best parents, but they're not necessarily the worst parents. There's a myriad of ways that the war on drugs hurts people and hurts our government and hurts our economy, hurts everything else.
So it's destroying families, it's creating concomitant crime situation, and of course drugs are as easy to obtain inside jail as they are anyplace else. So clearly that war is not working.
Or inside schools. I speak occasionally to, there's a local school in my area called Mahonison. And there's a teacher who does a panel on legalization of marijuana every year. And I speak, and I always ask, okay, how many people know somebody who smoked marijuana in the last 30 days? And everybody raises their hand. Well, if kids in the high school know people are smoking marijuana, I mean, none of us is really surprised by that, but that should tell you that maybe this whole prohibition thing isn't very effective.
And of course, they're not committing crimes because they smoked marijuana, yet they have to hide from the police because of their possession of a commodity that our government has decided is not appropriate for these people now. Terrible
to me,
situation.
The prohibition thing, it's so obvious. Alcohol prohibition failed. Drug prohibition is no different, except alcohol prohibition created Al Capone, and to paraphrase George Bush, I see 1,000 Al Capones. The drug
No,
wars
I
created
understand.
1,000 Al Capones.
Tell me
It's a
about some other
disaster.
issues that are important to your campaign. What about, for example, I'm down here in Brooklyn, and the government basically gave Bruce Ratner the right, just less than half a mile from where this studio is, to develop the Atlantic Yards. And if that meant taking people's homes away through eminent domain, so be it. And what would the Libertarian candidate respond to that?
Well, I'm not speaking specifically on this issue for the Libertarian Party, but I'm just speaking for myself. I generally do not like eminent domain. I think eminent domain is frequently abused. And I'm proud to say that as a member of the Guilderland Town Board, I stopped an eminent domain proceeding that was inappropriate. It's not that it was.
That's terrific. Tell us about that.
It wasn't the classic eminent domain problem like you're describing with Atlantic Yards or the Kelo case. It was a fairly simple one that might be appropriate for eminent domain. It was acquiring a piece of empty land for building a state road, but it was the process that was being followed. It's a little bit of a long story, but a guy was doing a mine, and 20 years ago he applied to the town for a permit to do a mine. I think he's mining gravel. And part of the deal was he was supposed to acquire this land so they could turn it into a public highway, a town road, that would serve the 6 or so homes in the area. And he never did it. And he never really made an effort to do it. He never reached out to the property owner or made very minimal efforts to reach out to the property owner to see if he could acquire the land, because he was supposed to buy the land and then turn the land over to the town for the road. So 20 years later, he comes to the town and he says, I can't get it. How about you guys acquire it by eminent domain? So the town taxpayers were going to foot the bill for something this guy was supposed to do. And we were going to take the land from somebody who really wasn't given fair notice. And that was the big problem, was the property owner really wasn't given fair notice of the process. And we don't know. Maybe that property owner really had something important to do with that land. We have no idea, because no effort was made to communicate with that property owner.
And it's his land. It's his land, of course, so he should have the right to make that determination.
Right. Well, in any event, I mean, eminent domain is recognized, it's a recognized thing, and there are appropriate uses for eminent domain, but the problem here was the process. And I stopped it simply by asking questions. I'm in the minority. I don't have any real power, but I have the power to ask questions. And by asking questions and challenging what they were doing, and just, very simply, fairly polite, I would say politely asking questions, all of a sudden the item disappeared off our agenda. We've never seen it again. It's been several months. So I think it's gone away. And, the reality is this miner should have contacted that property owner to see about acquiring the land. It should have happened 20 years ago. And for whatever reason, they dragged their feet.
Well, that's really commendable, because what you did was you said, you're taking this procedure, you're using it improperly, you're using it for your own reasons, and you're not considering the property value and the property owner's concerns, and that's the right thing to do as a government official. So what exactly is your role in Guilderland?
I am a town board member. In 2007, a friend of mine was running for town board, and he asked me to run with him. And figuring that the theory was I was just going to help him get elected by keeping some of his votes from going over to the other line, was a phenomenon called bullet voting. In the end, we ran a very, very solid campaign. We ran on the Republican line. There were 2 Democrat incumbents that we ran against, one of whom is the Albany County Democratic chair. And they had Democrat, working families, independents, and conservative lines. I love when somebody has both the working families and the conservative line, but they had all those lines, and we only had the Republican line. And we ran a great campaign. We beat them.
Fantastic.
In a town that is now plurality Democrat, we still won. Because
Very
we talked
good.
about
Very
the
good.
things.
Tell me about your opposition for governor. Andrew Cuomo, of course, has declared, and we're taping this for viewers. We're taping this a little bit before the Republican primary, or convention, I should say. But the most likely candidate is probably going to be Rick Lazio, and I would think that somebody like Palladino is going to disappear rather quickly. But why don't you tell us your take on those gentlemen? Sure.
Well, first of all, I think it's likely that Rick Lazio will become the candidate out of the convention. We'll see. It's too early to say. There's also talk about Steve Levy from Long Island. Maybe he'll be the candidate. I suspect that it will be one of those 2 and only one of those 2. Carl Palladino, I think, is not going to disappear quickly. I think he's going to petition to get on the ballot for a Republican primary. And I think he's a serious contender because he's campaigning as if he's conservative, more conservative than them, which is not saying that much because they're not very conservative, and he has some issues with consistency. My hope is that I will also be able...
He's sort of his own money-making machine, right? He cuts out the middleman, and he has all the money himself already.
There was a video that we put out, that our campaign put out, that I talk about special interests a lot, that Andrew Cuomo is bought and paid for by special interests. Rick Lazio is bought and paid for by special interests. And Carl Palladino is different. He's not bought and paid for by the special interests. He's his own special interest. Over the past several years, he's given over $100,000 to various candidates. And what's stunning for a guy who claims to be conservative is, on June 30th, 2009, he gave a $1,000 contribution to Chuck Schumer. And 4 days later, he spoke at a Tea Party. Now, I go to Tea Party events, and I get the impression Chuck Schumer is not considered a Tea Party guy. And it's not just the $1,000 contribution to Chuck Schumer. He has a long history. $4,600 to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Kerry, Gore, $17,000 to Spitzer. He's given money to the Democratic Assembly Campaign Committee, which is Sheldon Silver. Louise Slaughter in Rochester, who's one of the most hated people in the Rochester Tea Party area. He's given a lot of money to Democrats, and he has no answer for why he did it. He claims he's conservative. He claims he's pro-life, pro-gun, all this other stuff. Why are you giving money to Chuck Schumer if you're pro-gun?
Well,
why are you giving money to Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, John Kerry, Eliot Spitzer if you're pro-gun?
Because
pro-gun
he's a
people do not give money to those
businessman
candidates.
in downtown Buffalo, and if he needs favors, he knows he's got to grease the political machine however he has to. What about Mr. Cuomo? I understand he's taken a lot of money, even some money from a parking lot.
We have a video that just went out about we call it the Prince of Cuomo lot, as opposed to Camelot. Andrew Cuomo received a $55,000 contribution from West 37th Street Parking LLC. It's a parking lot. It's about 318 West 37th Street. We shot a video out in front, asked passersby what they thought about it. It was a good video. It's getting a lot of views on YouTube. He's taken 20 or so contributions of $50,000 or more. He is bought and paid for primarily by, I would say, real estate special interests. Rick Lazio, on the other hand, is bought and paid for by Wall Street special interests. Myers Marmel, I guess, is his own Wall Street special interest. I'm not exactly sure what his role is yet. He's brand new. Steve Levy is bought and paid for by some special interests. I haven't figured out exactly what the connection is. I guess they're Suffolk County special interests. I haven't figured out the details on that yet. And I'm the only one who's not bought and paid for. Unfortunately, that means I don't have any money.
But if somebody wanted to give you some money, where would they contribute?
What's that?
If someone wanted to give you some money, where would they contribute?
They would go to wredlich.com/NY and make a contribution, or mail a check to Warren Redlich for Governor, 255 Washington Avenue Extension, Albany, New York, 12205.
Warren, of course, we don't have a problem as libertarians. We don't have a problem per se with individuals giving money, even money for political reasons. I assume the problem is more the hypocrisy of the candidates once they get that money.
Well, no, I don't have any criticism of somebody giving money to a candidate. The question is, when a candidate gets a $55,000 contribution from a parking lot, what does that say about that candidate's motives when he gets elected? What's he going to do? And the second thing is that Andrew Cuomo, in his campaign announcement, said he was going to push for campaign finance reform. Well, how can you say you're for campaign finance reform when you're taking $55,000 contribution from a parking lot? That's hypocrisy. Rick Lazio, on the other hand, I don't think Rick Lazio is being hypocritical. He's a little bit hypocritical because he was speaking at the Massapequa Tea Party, and he said we've got to get rid of people who are tied up with the special interests and the big players and the money and the lobbyists. Well, he's a lobbyist, and he's taken a $30,000 contribution from Louis Ranieri, who's the guy who engineered securitized mortgages that brought down our economy. And I think you mentioned Cuomo and Lazio. I think the biggest thing about Cuomo and Lazio is Andrew Cuomo was the head of the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Mm-hmm. And he pushed for looser mortgage standards. And there are a lot of people, including the Village Voice, who lay at least part of the blame for our current economic crisis on Andrew Cuomo doing that. And one of the biggest problems with Rick Lazio is...
But the banks actually were forced to make loans when they said to the government, but this is a risky loan. This is a likely defaulting situation. And basically, a lot of the Housing Redevelopment Act said you must make that loan regardless. And
I think it's more complicated than that. I don't want to get into the specifics of the policy so much as to just say that Andrew Cuomo pushed for policies that other commentators and I've read the stuff and I agree with it, that Andrew Cuomo's policies contributed to the mortgage crisis and the economic crisis. And then when you get to Rick Lazio, what was Rick Lazio doing when Andrew Cuomo was doing that? Well, Rick Lazio was the chairman of a subcommittee in Congress that oversaw HUD. So Rick Lazio was doing the same things that Andrew Cuomo was doing. Rick Lazio pushed for the same policies. And I think it was as recently as 2004, the two of them appeared on a show together, and they were patting each other on the back, saying what a great job they did with making housing more affordable.
Well,
and you can get into all kinds of different theories about what the specific policy flaws were. That's a long, difficult conversation. But the idea that Rick Lazio is going to be the Republican candidate, this is one of Andrew Cuomo's biggest weeknesses.
Okay, well, let's move on to a couple of other topics because our time is unfortunately short tonight. Basically what you've said is that there isn't a whole heck of a lot of difference between the Republican and the Democratic candidates, and you're running for governor on the Libertarian line. One of the problems that we often hear as Libertarians is the wasted vote syndrome. Why would voters vote for a third-party candidate rather than one of the two major parties?
Well, actually, this is the best year you could ever have to be a third-party candidate because apparently you're wasting your vote if you vote for Rick Lazio, too. The polling, Andrew Cuomo is winning like 60-30. So, it's not like your vote. If you're a Republican and you want to support support Republican ideals, you're going to send you're not going to get Rick Lazio elected. He's got no chance of winning. It doesn't look like any of the major Republican candidates. I think I would actually have a chance of winning because I have an electoral strategy in a general election. They don't have a strategy. They don't have a plan. They don't have any money either. But I can make Andrew Cuomo answer questions about the head of a library making $689,000 a year. But getting back to your point, sorry. If you're worried about wasting your vote, there's never been a better time because there's no way to waste your vote. Everybody thinks Andrew Cuomo is going to win. Andrew Cuomo thinks he's going to win. Rick Lazio thinks Andrew Cuomo is going to win. The media thinks Andrew Cuomo is going to win. So you might as well vote for something you believe in instead of somebody who doesn't stand for anything.
In addition, don't we also have an important threshold as Libertarians to try to get at least 50,000 votes for the governor candidate?
Yeah, I mean, if you vote for a Libertarian candidate, for me, for governor in particular, and we get more than 50,000 votes, then that means that for the next 4 years, our Libertarian candidates have a much easier time getting on the ballot. It's really important that we get 50,000 votes because we have candidates running for Congress and they need 3,500 signatures. And if we get 50,000 votes in this election, that same candidate might need 100 or 200 signatures. So it's so much easier to get on the ballot as a Libertarian candidate if we get that 50,000 vote number. And we can do it. And there was a poll in March by Siena College that showed that I was getting 3 to 4% of the vote, which works out to 140,000 to 180,000 votes. So we're on the path. We just got to keep working on our campaign, getting the message out. And I hope anybody watching this, you got to not just go to the website and look at it yourself. We hope you give us money. But the biggest thing is you have to tell other people. We need you to spread the word and tell people, hey, there's a real Libertarian candidate running. He's really got an important message. Check it out.
And viewers, if you'd also like information about the Libertarian Party in general and some of its chapters, I urge you to go on to the websites of the New York State Libertarian Party. That's www.ny.lp.org. Or one of its largest chapters here in the city is the Manhattan Libertarian Party, and their website is www.manhattanlp.org, and there you'll see links to the newspaper Surf City, to this fine television show, to the National Party, and to other libertarian events and organizations. Again, those are www.ny.lp.org. Again, www.ny.lp.org for the New York Libertarian Party, or www.manhattanlp.org for the Manhattan Libertarian Party, which are the official websites of the New York State and the Manhattan Libertarian Parties. Warren, we only have a couple of minutes left. Can you tell me what a Warren Redlich governorship would look like?
Sure. There's a couple things. Number one, you hear the Elliot Spitzer and Carl Palladino approach, which is I'm going to come in like a steamroller and I'm going to make everything change on day one. It's not going to happen. That's a fantasy. Anybody who believes that you're going to come in like a steamroller and change things can just look at the reality. That's not how it works. Warren, if I'm governor, I have a legislative strategy to work with the legislature. Even though I don't agree with a lot of them, I think I can work with the legislature to make real changes. And the other thing is that the governor has the power of executive order. And I will use my executive order power to make sure that our police follow the Constitution, that our government agencies in general follow the Constitution, that we don't do things that violate people's constitutional rights, which is a very common problem that I see as a criminal defense attorney. People don't realize it until their kid gets arrested or they get arrested, and all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, why are they doing this to me? Well, because our government lets them get away with it. Now, I, as the governor, will make sure that doesn't happen, and I will cut spending, and I will go to the most vulnerable legislator first, and I will say, you're going to be on board with me on this pay cap, 100K pay cap. You're going to be on board with me with cutting this agency that we don't need. And if you're not on board with me, I'll be in your district tomorrow, and I'll be recruiting candidates to run against you. And that's how you get legislators on board with you, and that's how you make a difference. It's not by being a steamroller. It's not by talking intimidating language. It's by getting things done.
Well, just the idea of talking about the Constitution, that's probably something that the state troopers never hear about. So that would be a welcome change right there. Any other plans that you would put into effect?
Nothing leaps to my mind, but I want to say I know a lot of state troopers, and by and large, the state troopers are good people. It's the message that they're getting from their bosses that's wrong. And you tell state troopers we're going to follow the Constitution. Here's how we're going to do it. They're going to do it. They need clear instruction from their superiors, and I'll give it to them. But
okay,
I have
Warren,
tremendous respect for state
I know
police.
that you would urge voters to get onto the websites, to assist this summer in the petitioning process. Of course, the Democrats and Republicans have set it up so that they get on the ballots very easily, and small third parties like the Libertarians have to get 15,000 signatures, which is always difficult. So any efforts that could be made to assist. And if you could give us one more time the Redlich website so that people can get in touch with you there.
Sure, wredlich.com, WREDLICH.com/NY, or just Google Stop Wasting Money, and you'll find my website.
Stop wasting money. Thank you, Warren Redlich, the Libertarian candidate for governor in 2010. And thank you, viewers, for being with us tonight here on Hardfire. Please join us again in the next week for another issue of Hardfire. Warren, thank you and good night.
Thank you.